Next up, we have Oliver Pesch, Oliver has served as Chief Strategist for EBSCO's E-Resources Access and Management Services since 2004. In this capacity, he helps set direction for EBSCO's products such as EBSCO A to Z, Link Source, ERM Essentials, usage consolidation, and more. Oliver devotes a considerable energy to the creation and promotion of library standards. Currently, he serves as the co-chair of NISO's Sushi Standing Committee and the Executive Committee for Project Counter, as well as being a member of several standards committees. Pesch joined EBSCO in 1986.
Good afternoon. I was asked to provide additional vendor perspective on Counter and specifically on Release 4. EBSCO, when you think about Counter, we're involved in many different ways. We're a content host with EBSCO Host, EBSCO Discovery Service providing access to a large number of databases, aggregated databases and others to all kinds of different libraries. We also have an eJournal Gateway. In January, we released a usage consolidation product where we provide a tool to librarians to gather their Counter stats and load them for evaluation, consolidated reporting, and cost per use analysis. As part of that, we've also instituted what we call our usage loading service, where librarians that don't have the time to do the work themselves can contract with us. So we basically have staff that go out there and act like librarians, try to make sense out of Counter reports and downloading them and Sushi and so forth. And then, as Wayne mentioned, I'm also co-chair the Sushi Standing Committee from NISO, which is charged with the maintenance of the Sushi standard. And we're also the maintenance agency for the Counter XML schema. So what I'm going to do is talk about a number of different perspectives in this talk, that of a content provider, some of the advantages and challenges of Counter with respect to usage consolidation, like actually making use of the reports, and then look at how we at the Sushi Standing Committee and working with Counter have applied some of the lessons learned to when developing for Counter 4. So starting with the content provider hat, basically Counter, we see it as helping ensure that the value of content is assessed fairly. Budgets are tight. Librarians are using many different ways of trying to determine whether something is worth continuing with or not. Usage tends to be a very important metric. And for us, it is important to make sure that we can provide statistics, and others are providing statistics that are somewhat comparative, that can be used so that our content is judged fairly. And I think that's a big thing, big reason for Counter. And as Tom mentioned, it acts as sort of a target. So Counter was developed with input from hundreds or possibly thousands of librarians. So when you're come to developing usage reports, what better than to have somebody having done the work for you? And that's really where Counter can be a big advantage of that. And continuing on those lines, when you're approaching your development staff to try to create these reports, having something to give them that provides them sort of basic requirements is huge. And so that's another important contribution of Counter. Now, it's not all roses and sunshine, but it's usually pretty good. You still need to do the proprietary reports. You may need to do them. Counter gives you a good head start, but there's some reporting that Counter doesn't cover yet. And so, we don't look at this as a replacement for proprietary reporting. The good news is that the data you're already collecting can be used for both, so it's not a huge difference. Counter is a standard, and Sushi and the XML schemas are built for somewhat looking to the future and scalability, and like any such thing, there's a level of abstraction. And when you have abstraction, you have opportunities for ambiguity. When you have opportunities for ambiguity and you give for example, two different developers, you give them the same set of somewhat ambiguous specifications, chances are pretty high that you're going to have two solutions that are not the same. Thus, challenges with the compatibility between vendors, because they're not quite interpreting the same things. So this is something that actually, from a development perspective, when there's ambiguity, that lengthens the time to develop, because the developers are asking a bunch of questions. You have to try to find out the answers. It also lengthens the time to get it through the QA process, because the QA people think something different than the developers. And so that's one area that it's a lesson learned, I think. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in the close. So with Release 4, as a database provider, we're applauding the new database reports. Sessions and searches just really don't cut it when it comes to measuring database use. If you get discovery services in there, federated search, so just really almost meaningless comparative. The result clicks. Basically, the user was on a result list, saw an item from that database, and clicked it, whether it was going to their open URL resolver to look for more detail or whatever. There was enough interest in that item that they pursued something further, and that's what you want to measure. So it's a measure of interest. The introduction of the additional identifiers, the item level DOIs, the institutional level identifiers, the real advantage of that will come when librarians use those reports and load them into sort of consolidation systems. When you're trying to match up counter reports to an underlying knowledge base, that is not an easy thing. And again, it comes down to the easier it is to get things matched up, the more accurate things will be, and they'll actually get done. Librarians don't have a lot of time, so if there's problems, they may just start omitting loading usage for certain platforms. So again, we applaud these as ways of improving the whole situation. So now if we move on to look at the usage consolidation vendor. So this is the creator of a system that has to actually consume counter reports. Without counter, these types of systems really wouldn't be possible. I'm talking about like Scholarly Stats, 360 Counter, UStats from Ex Libris, and so forth. So that whole genre of application really is possible because of Counter providing that level of standard and consistency. And then you lump that with Sushi, and there's a potential for big savings by having the usage statistics pulled down automatically, same time every month, without somebody having to go do the work. And I won't steal Kathy's thunder, but I know they mess with a lot of reports every month for members, and that can take up a lot of time. And the code of practice covers a fairly broad range of reports, so that if you have a system that can support these, you have a fairly comprehensive solution for the customer. But again, challenges. Almost compliant reports, and there are a number of them that come close. And in fact, I suspect that most times would actually pass an audit, but they don't really. And I'm going to give you an example of one. This is a real report, but I have changed the platform name to protect the guilty. This is Database Report 1. From a human perspective, it looks close. It makes sense. But what's the problem? Bunch of missing data. So if you're an Excel gearhead and you do a data filter and you filtered that report on searches federated and automated, you would have no information about what those numbers are for. Okay? So you got to add in the numbers. Then, why are there blank lines? between the entries. The code of practice does not call for that. So you have to remove those. So now we're getting close, and we actually have something that will load. Our people that are running the usage loading service spend approximately 30 minutes fixing every one of these reports for each customer. So you've got supposedly a counter-compliant report that takes a half an hour of labor to get it to load into a system. And this is one example. We've contacted the content provider, and usually emails bounce off of Peter's back desk wall as we fire them off to him to let him aware to try to get the content providers engaged in solving these. But some of the other things we look at in this whole area, for example, report names. The report is Journal Report 1. And they list it as Counter Journal Report 1. So again, it makes sense. He's got it's to the human, but to the computer who's looking for cell A1, Journal Report 1, to see the word starting with counter, it can't confirm that that is indeed that or not, unless you custom code for every exception. Missing platform names and total rows, things of that nature. So we have a list, a growing list of, if you're loading usage from these content providers, please tweak the files this way first. So all this to say, lesson learned, good audience for this is that as you're looking through these things, precision matters a lot. So if it looks close, it may not be good enough. Sushi implementations, saying falling short, that's one of the real big challenges. Sometimes content providers put in overly complex authentication methods of extending the various protocols, which means to adapt to them, the client provider has to custom code. Lack of understanding of the market. More than once, we as an EBSCO, which I'm sure, same conversation by Scholarly Stats, 360 Counter, saying, okay, we are a hosted service, here is our IP for this customer. Then we go and say, well, here's our IP for this other customer. Say, well, you've already registered your IP for this one customer. So the bottom line is we are providing a hosted service. It's a requirement that that same client will retrieve usage for many different customers. And so it's important to develop the systems to match that. And the other thing is, and we're guilty of this too on some of our staff as well, is when you phone technical support and ask for help about how to set up the Sushi, they really don't know what you're talking about. And so, encourage your teams to become familiar with the products and how they work and how to set them up. So, finally, many content providers are still not counter compliant. A lot of them aren't. But for these kinds of services to work, you need a fairly comprehensive and complete set of data providers participating. So as we come across these, we pass them on to Peter, and Peter hunts them down and tries to sign them up, and we get them going. So if you're not already compliant, please do so. Now, with the Sushi Standing Committee, just changing topics a bit here, we have been working also for many months preparing for the release for the Code of Practice. We're trying to address a number of the challenges. Now, Counter has evolved with the needs, the librarians' needs, because they've evolved, Counter's evolved, new reports, new metric types, and these sorts of things. But we've been looking at it a little bit more of a practical way, trying to figure out how to improve compliance, interoperability, and just basically reduce frustration all the way around. So one of the things we did on the Counter schemas is we made them a little bit stricter. And that's so the automated validation things that every programmer knows about will find things. If your date really isn't a date, you don't have to wait for somebody to yell at you. It will not pass your quality testing. Years, the same kind of thing. That only goes so far. So Counter and the Sushi committee, we developed a Counter Sushi implementation profile. And the goal of this document is basically what you're allowed to do and what you're not allowed to do, basically removing the ambiguity. What metric types go with what reports, what values are allowed and what fields, and these sorts of things. So that is up and available on the NISO website. It's also linked to it through the Counter website, and it should be required reading for a developer. It should provide great guidelines of what you've got to do. And also our goal is for that to be input to the audit process so they can check to make sure things go well. Like a real simple example is when it doesn't ask, when you don't have an ISSN, don't include it, but please don't include the word unknown. and we've had reports doing that. So. Paul Needham, who works for the Journal Usage Statistics Portal, JUSP, out of the UK. We're fortunate to have him on our committee as well, and through the sponsorship of JISC and Counter, he developed a free web-based Sushi client that you can download the code, install it on your own system, use it as a template, but also use it as a test site to actually verify and validate. And we're having him work on actual validation modes too, so that if we can do some additional validations to ensure that a given sushi, sushi server meets the expectations of the auditors. So that's there. The Counter website's got a wealth of information on it. I'm sorry, and the NISO Sushi website does as well. So link to the Sushi website there. Have a look. There's FAQs, there's sample code, there's registries and a bunch of different things to try to help. So if you have someone within your organization that is developing for Counter, that's probably one of the first places to start. So no matter whether you're a content provider, building software that actually consumes the reports or downloading the reports, I'll agree with Tom, Counter is a success. It works. It can be improved, and every release we do, it gets better. And I think Counter Release 4 is going to be the best yet. So thank you.